because I realized in my society, I was brought up in school right from the get-go to win, to compete, to strive, to be a success. It was all about being a success. And same with my colleagues. We were all wanted to be successful. And it was only later I thought, well, what the heck is successful? And then I realized everybody on the face of this earth wants to be happy. We can't all be successful. We want to be happy.
So welcome to the It's Never About Money community. Really excited. You know that I get excited about my guests, but there's a method. I do have a strong conversation with Abby behind the scenes, who works with me around, who we want that really reflect the themes of the podcast, and have a chat with the person beforehand. And I will only, really want to have a conversation with someone I'm really curious about. And I tell you, I am excited about having Alastair Henry on the podcast. I've begun reading your book, Alastair, as I was telling you offline before, and I'm at the point where I kind of have a bit of an understanding of your background, which is exciting, but then there's a bit of a journey into the unknown that I'm wanting to explore with you today. So maybe I'll just give the listeners a little bit of a bio on you first, and then we'll head into the meat of it. So Alastair immigrated to Canada from England by himself when he was 19. He became a typical yappy, family house in the suburbs and a big job in the corporate sector. Following London's Life's Freedom 55 plan, he retired at 57, which is quite early, and went to live in the country. A year later, disillusioned with the passivity of retirement, he shed his material possessions and went to live for 2 years with a small First Nations band in a remote fly-in location in the NWT. Cultural differences and a challenging environment ignited him into fresh perspectives, inspired a new way of being, and fueled his soul searching. Since then, he has travelled extensively and volunteered around the world. He now writes books to help retirees to get into volunteerism as a means of personal fulfilment. I'm really excited, Alastair. Thanks for coming on. How are you?
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Joe.
So, as I said at the start, Alastair, I start my thinking about you in Bolton, in a very devout, sort of strict upbringing. You suggested there wasn't a lot of money there, scarce resources. You had a very strict, devout mother who was staunchly Catholic, I believe, and perhaps a more, would you say, more passive or mild-mannered father who was a humanist, you described.
Absolutely, yeah.
And perhaps you can take us through a little bit of the journey of what you were exposed to there, and how you were raised, because I think it's important.
Well, I went to a primary school that was run by nuns, an order of the nuns. And then I went to a grammar school run by priests and brothers. So religion was like every day I had a religion. It was just total brainwashing. They would come in and ask the class, does anybody have a calling? Anybody want to go to a seminary and become a priest? And, got us all thinking about it. Have I had a calling? We all check with each other, No, I don't think so. But once in a while, somebody from class disappeared. He went to the seminary to become a priest. That's really how close it was, But as I got older, I began to question. I had a hard time accepting the dogma, A lot of the Catholic dogma, I just couldn't. It just wasn't. I didn't have the gift of faith, and that's what I thought, you see. And they said, well, you're not praying hard enough, Al. That's why you don't have the gift of faith. So I prayed harder, but I still didn't get the gift of faith. So I started to reject it, I guess. But it took me a long time to reject it. I think I was about 35 when I finally shed my religion and decided that I'll have an open mind. And
So Alastair, on that, did you truly shed every element of it? And do you think that religion itself has not been impactful in positive ways in your life? Because you did talk about this idea, and I really resonated with the idea that you put religion in a backpack, and
Absolutely.
you
It,
kind of
it, it worked, Joe. It worked.
yes.
And I put
Tell
it
us
up
about
there
that.
in the closet.
Tell us about that.
Well, I was having a struggle with religion, and it was sort of bothering me because it was making me feel guilty for this, guilty for that. And I thought, I don't need this, you know. So I thought, what I'm going to do is just put my religion in a backpack, stick it in a closet, top shelf, close the door, and see if I can live without it. And I never looked back, never went back for the backpack. And that really was a turning point, big turning point in my spirituality. So it left me open
Mm.
to think and accept other, other ways of looking at life, I guess, because later on in life, I did run into like Buddhism. I adopted that. No problem. That made sense to me. I really liked how I, for me, it wasn't a religion. It was a way of life, just a
Is
way of being. Yeah.
is it also because you were able to, at an early age, firstly, you had some awareness about how you were feeling with respect to the rules that were imposed on you, but also you had another mode of being that you were observing in your father?
I think so too. Yes, exactly, Joe. He he was the role model. He was a pacifist, and he he was almost, well, he was humanist, but he could have been Buddhist, you know. But the big turning point, Joe, is I came to Canada when I was 19, so I cut the umbilical cord to everything, you know, to my religion, my parents, my siblings, my friends. I came by myself, and that's a year, very early age, 19. So I had to learn to become independent at a very early age.
Mm,
Nobody to turn to, nobody to
mm,
go back to and say, can you help me out?
mm,
And then very soon after that, well, I came out, I was in love. I got married and immediately had children. So I had to provide. So there was the motivation to, do something. So
mm,
I became I became a chartered accountant
mm,
in the corporate world, a yuppie thing,
mm.
So that's what you were talking about earlier.
So, there seems to be as well this, forget about religion for a minute, but with anything that is rules based and sort of dogmatic, with that may perhaps even doesn't allow for questioning, which I'm not saying religion doesn't allow for questioning, because it can. But in some cases, particularly in the early days, I think sometimes questioning things was seen as a problem, and you were seen as a bad Catholic for questioning things and so on. The idea that as a child, decision making, going with your gut about what is right for you, was effectively removed
Oh,
or
totally.
discouraged. And so what that ends up with in some cases, and I feel like I'm talking, maybe I'm projecting because I feel like some of it has happened to me as well, that you end up with this situation where you come to a point where you're like, geez, I don't even know what it is to follow my gut instinct anymore. I don't know what it is to actually make a decision for myself. And that's where part of the story really, like, I found you incredibly brave, because you met this young lady, and you fell in love head over heels by the sounds of things, young love, which is beautiful in and of itself. But then you you followed your gut instinct for the first time, which was really not something that your parents and the system would have particularly
No.
been happy with, because you eloped basically.
Yeah. Well, basically, um, she just told me one day, we'd only been dating a couple of months, and she said, I have something really important to tell you. I'm going to Canada with my parents in 4 weeks. I was like, 4 weeks? I said, well, I'm coming. So I went home and I just announced to my parents, I'm going to Canada. They were devastated because we were quite close, But man, the power of love, I tell you, the power of young love. Uh, there was no change in my mind. And I didn't do any research on Canada or anything at 19. Eh, so got my passport, got my ticket, and came to Canada.
Beautiful. So you found your way into
Yeah,
Canada, and now all of a sudden you're thrust into marriage,
yeah.
children. responsibility.
Yep, absolutely. And, the desire to get ahead. In Canada, I would say it was called a yuppie, a young urban professional person.
Hmm.
All my colleagues, we were all there working hard, aspiring, and at the time, there was a lot of job opportunities. So as I progressed through my degree, got my first year, second year, third year, there was always new opportunities. I was changing jobs like crazy for more money, more responsibility. I was really, and like my whole objective was to be the vice president of finance by the time
Why?
I'm 40.
Why?
What? Stature, success. It means I've arrived. So I did achieve it. I became the vice president of finance at 40.
Mm.
But a few
Why
years
did you
after
check?
that,
Yep.
hmm,
Yep. Go on.
but I wasn't, that didn't give me the fulfillment.
Mm.
So I thought, well, maybe if I work for myself instead of working for other people, maybe that's what it's all about. So I quit that vice president of finance job and I started up a logistics company with my son. And that's what we did for 12 years. Worked hard, very successful. And then it was from there that I retired and went to live in the
Mm.
country.
Do you think back into, again, like we talk about earlier days, sort of we reduce ourselves to a good or bad Catholic, self-objectification, again, rearing its ugly head. But then you get to a point where you start, working in industry and you reduce yourself to, I am a good person if I am the vice president. If I do well within my career, I am a good person. If not, I'm not a good person. If I have a business, again, if I'm doing well in the business, I feel good about myself. If I'm not doing well in the business, I don't feel good about myself. Can you talk about this idea of like reducing ourselves to a single mode?
Yeah. No, you're right on, Joe, because, we're all a product of our environment and our conditioning. So in Bolton, with the nuns and the priests, you were always told that you're nothing, Don't think you're anything special. You're not. You're just another. So you grow up with a very low uh, opinion of yourself. You lack confidence because you've never been encouraged to be or do anything. So that's what I was fighting. I think it was a journey to gain independence and get feel good about myself unknowingly. I mean, just subtle. But I think that's really where the complexity came in. For me,
Mm,
behind all the striving was this: I'm not good enough.
mm.
And if I do this and this, you're quite right.
So when we're following the money, as
Yeah.
and there's nuances to that. You weren't just following money. There was a sense of pride and so on in the status
Oh
and the
yes.
and responsibility that it
Yeah.
was associated with the job. So it's like we're not trying to make it binary. You definitely, there were different reasons why you were following financial success. But was there a point in time where you just looked at it and you just thought, was there a particular story or a point in time in this narrative between being a VP of finance or moving off into your own business? Is there a point in time where you just said, I just don't know why I'm doing this anymore? Like it's distorting areas of my life that I'm just not happy. Is there a moment?
No, no. I
No
was on
moment?
that treadmill. I was on that
Yep.
treadmill. It was
Yep.
all about because at the time, as I say, there were so many wonderful opportunities in Canada, job opportunities. So
Yes.
I was always looking in the paper. Whenever I looked in the paper, I saw, hey, here's another job. Yeah. And I went along, had the interview. They offered me the job. So it was all about, bigger homes, new cars. Yeah. All the things money could buy. So that's what the yuppie was all about. My colleagues, they were all fast tracked too. And this is the whole idea. The ultimate thing is eventually to retire. And
Mm,
then that's it.
mm.
Put your feet up because you've earned it, you've made it, you know.
So was that the case for you? The retirement thing was, I've earned it,
Yeah,
I've made it, or was it a case of,
yeah.
I just don't like what I'm doing right now, and
Oh
I have
no,
the
no, no, no. It was about, because I could, I've made it, and as I say, I had this wonderful place in the country. 50 acres, 5 ponds, 18 acres of bush, river running through the property. I mean, really, it was idyllic.
Mm.
And it was for a couple of years, and people would say to me, wow, you've got it made out. And I was playing golf. I was playing golf, well, sometimes 3 times a week.
Well,
But I was cutting all this grass because it was a big maintenance. 50 acres is a lot to maintain. And we had beavers coming to the ponds from the river. I'd come into the ponds, plug the culvert. I had to get in the water with my hip waders and unplug the culvert to let the water drain from the property, because I'd go away for a week and come back and I had a 50-acre lake.
mm,
The beavers had dammed it up.
mm.
But that's where one day I just started to think, is this it? Is this all there is? As I said, I've been very accomplished all my life. I've been a high achiever. And I think partly it was to do with, it was like withdrawal. I wasn't achieving anything. I was just playing golf and cutting grass, and that didn't seem to be enough.
So in some ways, working the way you were, pedaling the wheel and making money didn't seem to be enough. But in other ways, going into an early retirement and, being effectively a farm lad and enjoying the creature comforts
Yeah,
associated with some of that,
yeah.
but that also wasn't filling that gap
No,
for you, which is
no.
interesting. And we'll get to what did fill the gap, because I think there is something that did. But I'm still interested in this transition from a business mindset into a retirement mindset. And I think some people struggle with that transition. They don't find it easy to just retire. And I wonder whether that is because the costs associated with the unknown of stepping into the future, the negatives associated with the unknown and being unnerved by what might be or might not be by taking that next step, those costs are greater than just staying in the present moment, even though the present moment may not be actually desirable.
Hmm. Well, in my case, Joe, I really didn't have a choice. Um, when you read the book, you'll see
Mm-hmm.
I expanded too much. I got into over my head,
Yep.
and somebody came along and bought me out. So
Yep.
that was my exit from the world.
Yep.
If that hadn't have happened, I might have just continued on as before. So this gave me an opportunity to retire, which I did.
Yes.
And to think, well, what are you going to do now? You're only 57 now. And that's what bothered me. I thought, I'm only 57. What are you going to do for the rest of my life? Play golf?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think so. But I didn't want to go back in the corporate world, and I didn't want to go back into the city. I thought what I need is an adventure,
Is
and
that
that
also
was
is that also with I think your wife's name's is Candace, is that right?
yeah. But I didn't meet at that point. I hadn't met
You
Candace.
hadn't met her. Okay.
No, no.
Yeah.
I was with somebody else.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's when I went looking for something
Mm-hmm.
different. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, I couldn't stand the thought of going back into the corporate world and board
Okay.
meetings and budgets and all that stuff. Anyway, this opportunity came up to be the general manager for the development corporations of the Lutzelke Denny Band. Now, this is an indigenous, Aboriginal band, small, 300 Chippewa. In Canada, we've got
300 what? Sorry, say
603
that again. 300 what?
Chippewans.
Can you please
That was the
explain
tribe.
that to the so yeah, so what's that?
It's the name of the tribe.
Okay.
Huh? We have
Yep.
Dakotas and Chippewans. Oh, in Canada, we have 630
Wow.
distinct. We call them First Nations because they've been here for 10,000
Yep.
years.
We have the same
So
thing in
same thing
Australia.
as,
Yep. Yep.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. But in Canada, we call them First Nations.
First Nations people. Yep.
So it was 300 Chippewas on the little peninsula on the east
Hmm.
arm of Great Slave Lake in Canada's Northwest Territories. So it's just a little community of 300 people. And they were nomadic up until about 1920. They used to go up to the Barren Lands with the caribou, following the Beverley caribou herd. Used to be 400,000. They'd go up there to the Barren Lands, to the tundra, in March for the calving season, and then back to the tree line in September for the winter. And then in 1920, they settled because Canada said, hey, you guys, you can't go roaming all over the land like that, you know? You got to settle. So the place is called Lutzel Cay. Lutzel Cay. So I went there as the general manager of the development corporations to run their businesses, and that was it. That's all I intended to do.
So, what did you
Diamonds
find
with,
when you first went there? Because I mean, you're still in the mindset of the Western, you know, capitalist
oh, yeah,
mode of being, and then you're going to this particular
yeah.
new place, this foreign land with a different system.
Oh,
What were you doing that you felt was just like, oh my god, there's some resistance here. I don't seem to fit in. Like I'm sure that would have been the case.
oh, absolutely, Joe. I mean, I was 19. I hadn't done any research, you know, you couldn't Google stuff like you can today. I just went there with an open mind and all my corporate best practices, you know, to run these corporations really professionally. But man, they didn't work up there, you know. Best practices don't work because even though they're Canadians, it was like going to the moon. They weren't brought up in the society, the, the commercialized capitalistic society that I was brought up. So absolutely, and I was I mean, there was only one of me. There was 300 of them, you know. So their way prevailed. So in many, little by little, I learned. Like one of the things would be, I would before the work day, I'd say, okay, here's our expectations, here's our job objectives. You know, by the end of the day, we're going to achieve this. Well, by the end of the day, I'd have a meeting with them all, and I'd talk about what we didn't achieve, and they'd look at me blank and say, "Why are you talking about what we didn't do? Is that important? We didn't do it. Why don't you talk about what we did do?" And I thought, well, that's a good point. And then I realized, you know, everybody did their best. You know, maybe it wasn't good enough in terms of we didn't meet all the objectives, but the thing was, they did their best. And if one of them was hungover, he still showed up for work and he did his best. So rather than be critical, I just thanked him for doing his best. So from that point on, I just, you know, went in there and said, okay, let's go, guys, you know, and whatever they did, I just celebrated. And it was such a relief to just adopt that mindset
I mean,
rather
right now I'm
than,
listening. I'm listening right now, and I'm like, well, that's not really financially effective.
it doesn't matter. No,
No, no.
no, doesn't.
That's what we bring, right? That's what we bring in. You know, once we're so used to every hour is allocated and every hour has a dollar assigned to it, and
Oh,
every
yeah.
person has a different dollar value. Um,
Well, the
it's
thing was, Joe, when I
yeah.
went in there, as I say, it's a different world. Number one, they all welcomed me, invited me. I went, Tommy, I said, do you want to come and check my trap lines on Sunday? I got a snow machine, a snowmobile, and that was great, you know. I went across the Great Slave Lake once a month to get groceries. It was a 5 hour trip going at like 100 kilometers an hour. Oh, to get groceries because there was no selection. It looks okay. There was one co-op store.
Mm,
That was it.
hmm.
No bank, no coffee shop, nothing. So people invited me to their home for this, for that. I went out most weekends with Dave and Paula fishing. And that's when I learned that, I really help people is what I'm all about. And it was anyway. Later on, when my daughter gave me a journal to write in when I went there, and she said, you know, write in this, Dad, because we know it's going to be very different up there, and we want to know what it's like. So I
That's
did.
wise.
I wrote in the journal right from day one. Initially, out of a sense of obligation, because I knew Nikki would be saying, "How's it going, Dad? How's the writing?" And I didn't want to say, "Well, I haven't put pen to paper," so I did. But there was so much happening. I was writing every night about this and that because I was in this new world. Everything was so different. And later, as I was, that's another story, but later I realized how much I had changed. In the beginning, when Joe came to see me and said, "Can you help me?" my reaction was, "No way. You know, I'm the businessman here. I'm not your personal counselor. I'm not here to help you. Really, very cold. But I figured I have to do this, otherwise they'll take advantage of me. But 2 years later, it's like, "Hi, Joe. What can I do for you today?" I just changed totally because I realized helping people is what gave me fulfillment.
Mm.
In the corporate world, as I reflected back, I thought, man, I never stopped. I just went all day multitasking. Got a meeting at 2, should make this, got to do a report by 5. I was going through the motions,
But is
but
there
I
a
wasn't.
possibility that we could adjust? I mean, it's hard within a system that
Yeah, I
kind of
don't know, Joe.
forces you to focus
Yeah.
on
You
the end
see,
outcome. Is there a way of changing the means in which we get to the end that,
only
like
by,
you talk
only
about
by,
for helping people, right? We do help people in a sense, even here, but it's just harder to
well, I
stick
think
with
by
that.
this podcast, Joe, making people aware. You
Yes.
know, when you're in the forest, that's all you see is trees. You have to leave. So, you know, when I went there, of course, I'm looking through my worldview, my eyes, in my, if you like, North American
Mm.
capitalist eyes.
Hmm.
And initially, I'm saying, man, these people are so dysfunctional. They're
Mm.
so irresponsible.
Mm.
God, they're so unaccountable. What's the matter with them? But as I got to know them, I realized they live in the moment, simply in the moment. They don't, their head isn't full of stuff. They're not worried about next week, next year. None of them have, you know, retirement funds. They don't care. They just live happily. And I like that. And I started to be that way, just
Is
to
it
go with the
is it po-
flow,
is it
make it
possible
up as
to
you go.
merge aspects of that world with this world? Because I think what you're saying is, whilst you're observing these things that you originally thought were dysfunctional, I think the logical step is that you've actually saw these things that were originally dysfunctional to be actually quite adaptive and quite functional and quite kind of almost part of our human nature that we've kind of moved away from a little bit in some of the
Well,
in our current society. Is that would that be
yeah.
correct?
Oh, absolutely, Joe. Because when you're in, I was brought up in this capitalist commercial world, and you just take it for granted. This is the way it is. But it's only when you leave the trees and go see the forest that you realize, it doesn't have to be this way. And later on in life, as I went to Bangladesh, 170 million people, tiny little country, man, people everywhere. Every street you went down, there are like 20 people on there. Well, but I realized they were whistling, they were smiling, they were singing. And it dawned on me, I said, how can they be happy? They got nothing. I strived all my life and I didn't find happiness. I did in Lutzoke once I started to change my point of view and my worldview. I started to unconditionally accept what is. Because I realized in my society, I was brought up in school right from the get go to win, to compete, to strive, to be a success. It was all about being a success. I said with my colleagues, we were all wanted to be successful. And it was only later I thought, well, what the heck is successful? And then I realized everybody on the face of this earth wants to be happy. We can't all be successful. We want to be happy. And then I looked at the rickshaw driver in Bangladesh. He had no aspirations to be anything else. He was a rickshaw driver. So was his dad and his grandfather, you know. So they just accept what is. And so they don't have that um, negative feeling about not making it, you know.
And I think it's because as well, you talk about, you've always at an early age been driven for this success, but the success has been the factors that are actually involved in what we talk about success here um, is not necessarily what our own internal success looks like. Like it's not necessarily aligned with what we need to do to be happy and
Yeah,
satisfied. It's actually more of a system-based creation. So success means there has to be a certain amount of money, or there's never enough. There's never enough money. That we need to meet certain financial, hurdles to feel that success. When in fact we know internally that there are aspects that we really value outside of just financial gain that make us happy. So why is that not seen as being successful?
yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, we're conditioned from birth as part of society. We're part of. I'm a Canadian. I
Mm,
have North American views. You would be different, of being an Aussie, you know. But the thing of it is, at some point, you have to realize and give your head a shake and say, "I want to be me. I'm going to shed my conditioning. I want to be me." Some people just depart, go and live off grid, and things like that. So that's the type of, you know, realization. For me, it didn't. It came about because I removed myself and put myself in a different situation. So it was just luck that would do it for me, you know. But once I was on that, I realized, and I started to read books on Buddhism and whatever, and I really liked that philosophy, you know. Just go with the flow, make it up as you go. Because in business, back in the corporate world, I was doing strategic planning, you know. It was all about budgets and boardrooms and meetings. It wasn't about people. It wasn't about people at all. I mean, I had colleagues, but they really weren't people. So when I went to Lutzoke, I realized the power of community. They're all part of. There's no
mm,
subdivisions in
mm.
Lutzoke. 300, they all live in one place and they're all related and they do. And that's where the joy comes from. That's
So,
where they get the happiness from their community.
so tell us, give us examples, give us some stories around this, because there's again this sort of idea of early beginnings. You saw two worlds again, from a religious perspective, and now all of a sudden you're in thrust into this position where you're seeing
Mhm.
two worlds again, and now you're going back into kind of maybe a bit more traditional ancient world, which is very different. And so you've touched on living in the present moment. You've touched on um, being grateful for not having, not worrying that you don't have it, just but then you've also gone into this community aspect, which is fascinating to me, because I think we create community now through many different groups, through technology and so on and so forth, but it still feels like we've got a fractured and fragmented idea of community now, more so
Yeah,
even now than ever. Even when I was in my younger years, I felt like community was stronger than it is now, my personal feeling. But, you know, talk to me about what community means to the First Nations people there.
well, as I said, they've been there for 10,000 years, and you know, we had the thing where the colonialists tried to kill the Indian, right? With the residential schools, you had that in Australia too. It was terrible, terrible. But anyway, that's another story. So when I was in Lutzoke, after 2 years, I realized. You see, the other thing is, we cut payroll. So we had about a number of people on the payroll. I ran a couple of fire crews. I got a couple of contracts from the government. Fire prevention mostly, putting out fires on the land. But I also had people that we sent to their mines to be caterers, to be janitors. So I had a payroll, and I had a Visa card. And just so happened that I bought in Yellowknife a tent, a couple of sleeping bags for somebody that was going to the spiritual gathering. They asked me, could I help them? So I said, sure, So I did that, and I just got reimbursed because I just took it out of their pay. No problem. It wasn't a risk. But then other people heard and said, can you do that? So I started to buy a lot of stuff with my Visa. Now, people in the South said, you're crazy. I wouldn't do that. So, well, it's something that I have that I can use to help people. It doesn't cost me anything, so why not? And that's when I realized, helping people, I could with in other ways too, with my skills and knowledge of the outside world. They would come to me for advice and say, do you think I should? So I'd talk to them and say, well, that's really, thank you. So when I left there 2 years later, because I thought, I'm not Dene. I don't want to retire up here. It's not my world. But I was so enthused with helping people. That's decided when I went to Dhaka, Bangladesh, to to volunteer with a small NGO installing microcredit programs,
Mm,
working with the abjectly poor
mm,
in rural and coastal villages.
mhm.
So I went to a different world, you know. And in this world, it's the same thing. They've got nothing, and, but they have community. I mean, the older generation, the grannies, the grandpas, they look after the children, the grandchildren.
Mm,
They're not in retirement homes.
mm, mm,
So, as I say, the rickshaw operator, he does what he has to do. I mean, horrible labor, horrible. But he goes home, and that's where his joy comes from. His children, his grandparents, his brother and sister, all the things they do. So for them, work is just a means to earn money.
mm,
None of them aspire because there's no opportunities.
mm.
So it's a whole different world.
It seems to
And I
me that
thought,
it's super interesting that you talked about, I suppose, these worlds, they actually revere the
mhm,
elderly for their wisdom and their
yeah,
contribution. And what you've been looking for and craving, ironically, is a sense of contribution into your
mhm,
retirement because you
yes,
have something to contribute. You are of significant value, and it's proven through your own or your autonomy and search for this, for how I can help. Whereas some
yeah,
people may be in situations where they're cast aside, perhaps they don't have the skills to be able to go and find how they can contribute, or they may just not, they just might not be forward. Might not be pushing forward in the same way that you did. So it's interesting. Like, I think our society has some room to move in the way that we handle transition from a certain type of work when we're younger to a different type of work when we're older.
yeah. And I think, Joe, in our world, in our capitalistic world, we get stuck in boxes, and people think this is what I do. It's all, but you can't live 50 or 60 years without learning anything. And a lot of people underestimate their worth, you know. And a lot of people say, well, just go and help, just volunteer and help. And like you say, your dad, you know, driving their food to the food bank. You, a lot of people say, well, I have nothing to offer, and it's a sad story when you feel like that. We
Hmm.
all have so much to offer, and the thing is, other people will tap into it and we'll be surprised. It's like, wow, I didn't know, I could be that useful.
Hmm. Hmm. Are there any other examples of how integrated the community was there compared to, say, what we have?
Well, it's totally different. As I say, you know, in my world, it's all about growth, GDP. That's all we hear,
Hmm.
and the governments are pushing this, pushing that, subsidies here, subsidies there. In their world, they just clip along every day. They get up, and the same thing happened when Candace and I volunteered in Kingston, Jamaica. We were there for a year, and of course, we're living at the same level as our colleagues, so we're not driving around in a Buick or a Chevy. We're catching the public bus and the taxis, and on the buses, everybody's singing. Somebody just starts up, mostly gospel songs. Everybody joins in and they think it's so happy and joyous. This would never happen in Canada, This just would never happen because we're all so serious, so business, so.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
So, Alistair, do you think? I mean, the podcast name is "It's Never About Money," but
yeah,
do you think the fact that you're able to do what you're doing, the reality of it is, and you please push back if you feel that this is not the case, but the cost associated with you being able to do what you are doing now is a life potentially, or part of your life where you've sacrificed.
no.
No, go for it then. Please explain
Okay.
it to me.
When I went to Dhaka, Bangladesh, I
Mm.
went with a volunteer sending organization
Hmm.
called VSO,
Hmm.
Volunteer Services Overseas.
Hmm.
They paid my flight, my accommodation, or gave me a stipend for travel. It didn't cost me a penny. I didn't save anything. In fact, when I was there, uh, 3 times on my time off, I decided to go to India because my job really was Monday to Friday. Weekends was my own time. So I went to India. I went to the Taj Mahal. I went to Varanasi. Went to Cherrapunji. But that was on my own dime. But it was so cheap. It was so cheap. And it was the same thing when we went to Kingston, Jamaica. We went with CSO, CUSO. It used to be called, it's an acronym, but it used to be Canadian University Services Overseas. It's part of Canada's international development effort. That's where the funding, the money comes from, the government, to send volunteers like Candace and I to Kingston, Jamaica for a year. Everything paid. Same thing with Georgetown, Guyana. Didn't cost us anything. In fact, we saved because our pension was going into a bank account every month.
I get that. So the ability to be able to go and do it is of no cost, but the actual ability to make a change like you did and want to go out and do that, you had an element of financial backing, so that you could potentially go and do that as well. So what I'm saying is, as an example, if people are living hand to mouth, they may feel a bit powerless to get involved, say, as much as you may have, and that might not be right. So they may be able to, right? But do you get what I'm saying? That
Yeah.
the situation presents for some people. It's a bit for me to say here and say it's never about money.
Yeah,
It's just
I know
it's
what
a
you mean.
tagline, right? But
Yeah.
sometimes people get stuck because they need to get somewhere financially. They feel anyway to be able to
Mhm.
then look after and help and contribute in other
Well,
ways.
I was fortunate. I don't know in Australia if there are any volunteer sending organizations, but as I said, VSO and CUSO,
Hmm.
it there was no money out of our pocket. The thing is, we had money in a bank because we sold our possessions and everything,
Yes.
but we just went with an open mind and said, if it doesn't work out, we'll just pull the plug, come back. No big deal. And Candace was of the same mindset. We just decided that, well, we loved all. Actually, well, what happened is we decided we love change. We just love I know most people have a problem with change because it means leaving the comfort level.
Mm.
But when you embrace change, it's so exciting. You just don't know what will happen next. And that's the wonderful part of it, the people you meet, what you get to see. So when I went to Bangladesh, I had no idea I would end up seeing the Taj Mahal and Varanasi and Cherrapunji. And, you know, these things just happen.
Amazing. Do you think there's a connection between money and meaning?
Money and meaning.
Hmm.
No, and, I think we're fortunate. I'm fortunate because I came to Canada. People in Canada are quite affluent. I know we all talk about affordable housing and the cost of living, but we live in a socialistic, as opposed to the States. There's more poverty in the States, man. It's like going to Africa in some places. But in Canada, no, we're all comfortable. I mean, but we're brought up with this mindset. It's never enough. Always want more. Always got to win. You always got to compete and come out the winner. And we have this thing about losing, because if you don't win, you lose.
And it sounds like,
And
you know,
and what I
yep.
noticed when I went to Lutz, I did find that competitiveness there. They, they all sort of just went about the business. And I thought, that's just so nice when you remove that competing and just relax and just, they live in the moment. And that's the only way I can say, they just live in the moment and enjoy the moment. I mean, I think we all strive to be like that, but it's hard in our society because we're so brought up to multitask and all the rest of it.
It sounds like really from the days of, your early days into, working, making money, making that major change, following love, going through to, thinking, why is something still missing, going into early retirement, enjoying that for a period, but realizing something's still missing. Feels like that missing piece was contribution, it sounds like. And my question is to you, is it still missing? Do you still feel something missing, or are you feeling...
No. Cut long story short, Joe, I wrote a book, an autobiography. It's called Awakening in the Northwest Territories.
That's the one I've been reading. I haven't finished it yet, but I'm getting through it.
Well, the subtitle is One Man's Search for Fulfilment.
Yes.
And that's what I realized that's what I was looking for, fulfillment. And fulfillment for me is working with, helping other people. We're all on the planet. If we can help, because, realize I'm privileged. I've had the fortunate opportunity to gain skills and experience, and I can share them to benefit other people. So, for me, that's what it's all about.
I'm interested as
But
well. Sorry, go on, Alistair. Yep, go on.
Okay, so when I went to Lutz, it was okay. It's a long story, but I was okay. I was living okay, but it was minimally. I didn't have, because they don't have a lot of stuff. Well, when I went to Bangladesh, it was even worse. Oh man, it's so bad. I mean, you go to the toilet. Well, there's no toilet bowl, right? You got to learn to squat over the hole in the ground.
Yep.
But you do. You learn.
Yep.
And it's no big deal. After 2 years, I found it odd sitting on a toilet seat.
So it's bad. It's so bad. Yet you've also observed that they're very happy.
Yeah.
Just a strange.
But for me, it was growth. It's just one great big journey of growth, And I think a lot of it is just keeping an open mind. And it wasn't about the money. It was about experience. Experiences. And as I reflected on life, I thought to myself, I don't remember all the cars I had or all the houses, but I do remember the experiences. And that's when I thought, experiences are more important than assets, than
for sure.
acquisitions.
Sure. So I think,
and I just regret buying so much. I should have spent the money on experience.
Actually, I'm
Machu Picchu,
I'm having a conversation with a social scientist who looks at things like, you know, people's happiness when it comes to the items of spending. And when we spend on things versus experiences, there's a marked difference in the level of happiness. So you're onto it, and you're onto it not from a scientific basis, but from a practical and what makes you feel good basis, which I think is very, very relevant. I just also would like, if possible, we have many different people from many different walks of life, and I don't like the word retirement, to be honest, because I think it means so many things to different people. But when people want to shift from, you know, one mode of personal exertion to another mode of personal exertion, um, you know, where there may be more contribution for no financial gain, where what are the tips that you can give people thinking about moving out of their current work situation into what we typically call retirement now? Any
Yeah.
tips?
Well, what it's just an observation, Joe. But a lot of people, they get a job when they're 20 and they do it for 40 years. I
Yep.
mean, that's them. That's their identity. That's what they do.
Yes.
And the thought of leaving that, of retiring, is scary. It's
Yes.
like, well, what am I going to do?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, but you can do so many. You can just change. I know that. I did. Reinvented myself so many times, but it wasn't, none of it was planned. It just happened. When you keep an open mind, you just do it. And the thing is, a lot of people are afraid of change. They really are. And it's your podcast is called "It's Never About the Money." Well, for a lot of people, it is. It's about their pension. They can't retire yet because they won't get the full pension. They better work another 5 years. Well, they may not be here in 5 years. You got to seize the day. If you're comfortable enough, you don't need as much. You need very little, really. We just kid ourselves. And then you have a problem later in life shedding because you become a hoarder. It's like, oh no, I can't let that go. I've had that all my life, and that was my grandma's. And you realize, man, it's just stuff. It really is. When the push comes to shove, just let it go because
Mm.
it's just a burden.
Very wise words. I
Mhm.
keep thinking about the, spending to have experiences versus spending or keeping money
Mhm.
just to hoard. And sometimes we have conversations with families around, well, you've worked so hard, it's time to start enjoying and start to have experiences and start to go out and, if you're inclined to volunteer, do other bits and pieces. And it's really hard to shift the patterns that have been created
Yeah,
over a working life, isn't it? And you've done that number of times, actually.
yeah.
You've shifted patterns. You've been
Oh, yeah,
indoctrinated into a world. You've gone into a mode of being. You've been aware that it is a mode and a a way of being, and then
yeah.
somehow, and it's not. I don't think we want to take this lightly. I think we want to ask the question: how do you do that?
Just by keeping an open mind and saying yes to opportunities. Yeah, it's really funny how things work out. None of it is planned. I mean, if I'd when I was asking, when I was 57 and saying, "Is this it?" If I said, "Yes, it is. This is what you're going to do, Al. This is what retirees do," I wouldn't have known anything else. And yet, because I said no, there's got to be more to life than this. Man, I went to Lutz OK, and that totally changed everything for me because I immersed myself in a different culture. I was open minded, willing to change, to adapt. And then from there, I, went to Bangladesh. I started this volunteering thing, and I got so much out of that after I met Candace, and she was of the same mind, she said, "Man, I like what you're doing." She sold her house and everything and joined me. And this is 12, 15 years ago. We went to Kingston, Jamaica. And then in between, when our assignments, like they were contracts, Dhaka, Bangladesh was a 2-year contract. When the contract was up, they flew me back to Canada. Well, I was homeless because I'd sold my house and everything, but I had a bedroom in my daughter's basement. So I moved in there. She said, "Well, how long are you going to be here, Dad?" So I don't know, till I get another assignment. And Candace did the same thing with her daughter. But we thought, it's not fair. We can't just keep moving in with our children. I mean, they've got a life. It's just not, we can't impose on them.
Yeah.
So we decided, let's go backpacking. So we decided that we would go backpacking as if we were 20 years old. So
I love that.
we went to, so we flew to Costa Rica,
Yes.
and we went for 4 months. Little backpack, 25 pounds, all that was in the backpack. The minimal amount of socks, underwear, shirts. That's it. You don't need much. It it was a hot climate, so we didn't need rainwear and winter fleece.
No,
You
no.
just no, just cotton stuff. So we backpacked for 4 months through Panama, Costa Rica, and Nicaragua,
Oh,
and then
wow.
we were in the top of Nicaragua, going on our way to Guatemala, when Cuso sent us an email and said, "Hey, we got a couple of opportunities in Georgetown, Guyana. Would you be interested?" Well, that was our next assignments. And then after Georgetown, we did the same thing. We went home and moved in with our kids and said, "No, let's go backpacking again." Now, this time, we're both close to 68, 67, and we went to Southeast Asia. So we spent a month in Bali, a month in Vietnam, a month in Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand. Wonderful. And then because of that, we wrote this book, Budget Backpacking for Boomers, because people were saying, "God, you must have a lot of money." I said, "Nope, we did it on $40 a day per person." So we had $80 for accommodation, travel, and food, and we did it. It's so cheap, eh? In Southeast
Amazing.
Asia, we
I'm,
we don't realize that.
I mean, I'll just let you into the insight into my head. I'm just, my cup's full because I'm listening to you and I'm
Oh,
thinking about, my own future, and I think I'm just so excited by the future, listening to
you
what
should
it
be.
is that you've been doing. That
Yeah.
people just worry so much and just don't do it. They think that just because they're getting into their 60s or whatever, and they should be just taking a pension and just like you're doing it all, and it's amazing. It's really amazing. I, I,
Because it's never about the money.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
the thing, Joe.
exactly right.
You're right on.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
people do,
yep,
because we grow up in this capitalist society. It's all
yep,
about money, but it
yep,
really isn't.
yep,
Life is
yep,
not about money.
yep. Now I don't get anything out of this. I'm obviously reading your book, which is effectively your memoir, and I had two options. I had the option of doing my speed reading, which I can do, and not really engrossing myself in it, or because I had limited time before this particular
Yeah,
podcast,
yeah.
or I actually engrossed myself in it. And what I found was from the opening page, I chose that I had to engross myself in it because to speed read it would have been not as enjoyable. So what I'm saying is you've got a gift in terms of your ability to obviously communicate, but also in a written form, it's quite elaborate and quite immersive. And I really was there with you. And I think, if anyone's listening today that really loves what we're talking about, I'd encourage some of your resources and some of your books that you've published, Alastair. So perhaps you can tell us, what's available and, maybe where to find.
Yeah, sure, Joe. But let me I'll tell you something. When I went to Lutzoke, my daughter gave me a journal, as I said, right? That was the start. I'd never considered being an author, never. So I was writing because so much was happening,
Yeah.
and I was trying to get it down because I wanted to tell my daughter about it, and my other children. And right at the end, um, after the 2 years, I had this journal, but I also had about 8 notebooks, all filled with stuff that I'd been writing every night. So I had all this stuff. I thought, well, I can't turn this over to my daughter and say, "Here you go, read this." It really wasn't readable. So for some reason, I had a flash, and I thought, "No, I got to put this into a story." I decided, I just picked a place out in the world, Cahuita, Costa Rica. And I got a guest house down there on the Panama border. And I went there for a month and I typed all those notes into Word.
Wow.
And then I started, and I had like 350,000 words,
Wow.
I mean, you can't read that. So I started to go through it, to edit it. A lot of stuff didn't go anywhere, so I just deleted it. But other stuff was a little beginning of something that the rest of the story, happened later, month later, two. So basically, when I finished, I called the book White Man on the Land. But it started off with me going to Lutz OK and coming out, and the change that happened in me because of the different culture, geography, worldview, everything, religion, spiritual. They're very spiritual, but their own Aboriginal spiritualism. But I found that more relevant to me than Catholicism.
Well, have you had a thought?
So anyway,
Yep.
So what happened is I gave the book to some people and they said, yeah, lovely, really lovely. But readers will want to know, who was this person who went to Lutz OK and what did they do afterwards? So I carried on writing and the book became Awakening in the Northwest Territories.
Beautiful.
It's an autobiography. Yeah.
Okay.
Then I carried on writing. With Candice, we co-wrote Go For It, Volunteering Adventures on Roads Less Traveled. We co-wrote Budget Backpacking for Boomers. We co-wrote another one called Tides of Change. That was about a 4-month stint I did with an indigenous band out in British Columbia.
Yeah.
And then I wrote a historical fiction novel. Really, I had all these early childhood memories and I wanted to write about that because I realized the world had changed. And so a lot, it's almost like a biography, but it's fiction.
Yeah, amazing. So what we'll do is in our show notes or somewhere, we will make these resources and links available, which will be nice. And just to finish off, I do ask the question of every guest, but I feel like given your tie to spirituality and the First Nations people, maybe you've had a thought of what your spirit animal would be.
I think a wolf.
A wolf.
Yes. Wolf. Yeah. On the go.
On the go.
Yeah.
Yep. Lives in the present moment. Yep.
Yeah. Roaming.
Community.
Seeing what's around. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds great. Well, thanks again. I really appreciate the time you've afforded us. It's been a really amazing journey. I've quite enjoyed both reading the book, but getting to know you a little bit as well. And long may this journey continue. It's fantastic.
Yeah, well, call me anytime, Joe. My pleasure.
Good on you, Alastair.
I love talking with you.
If you have resonated in any way with the sentiments of this podcast, we would be delighted to direct you to our website, www.itsneveraboutmoney.com.au, for more free resources and education aimed at improving your capacity to make sound financial decisions for the benefit of your family. We wish you every success, however you define it.